14. We have another MCLE set for November 14, which is on the recent Supreme Court case about the homeless being in public spaces, City of Grants Pass versus Johnson. Two of our members successfully argued that case before the Supreme Court. It's going to be very exciting. Theani Evangelis and Lefteris Christos. So the date is going to have to be changed. So stay tuned for information about that. And tonight, our speakers were arranged by Judge Steve Canellis. I'm going to introduce him and he'll introduce the speakers. Steve, we're very proud of because he joined the Hellenic Law Society as a law student way back when. He was a prosecutor in the Contra Costa and the Riverside County DA's offices, and he was elected to Superior Court judgeship in 2010 in the county of Riverside, where he's been on the bench ever since. Steve, please introduce our program.
Sure, and thank you, Peter, for your introduction, and also thank you to the Hellenic Law Society for endorsing me in my election. I appreciate that as well, a long time ago, and many of you supported me. So it's a pleasure seeing so many people here. I think we have about 30 participants tonight, and I want to thank Christina Mantas and Andreas Politis for accepting the invitation to join us this evening. I first became aware of them and their practice and their firm through a colleague of ours in Southern California, John Midzidis, who was I would call him a trailblazer in this process, and he raved about Christina and her firm in assisting him in obtaining the citizenship that he was seeking. And then this past summer, my wife and I were in Greece on vacation, and we needed some assistance from their firm for some family matters. And as a result, I came into contact with the firm, and we continue to work together. So it's a pleasure to have them in person. I've met Andreas in person, and so I can tell you that Andreas has been wonderful to work with. So they bring a level of expertise to the, can I call it Byzantine Greek law, small b, Byzantine, and all the processes that many of us would not otherwise be able to understand firsthand. But they make the process straightforward, understandable from our perspective, and they bring a sensitivity to Americans that I appreciate in terms of being able to communicate effectively, as well as explaining what the legal requirements are for the process. So I want to thank both Christina and Andreas for waking up at 6 a.m. Athens time and being with us. And I will, and I believe that Christina was a graduate of American Law School as well, so and Greek Law School. And Andreas has been European educated as well in the law. Highly qualified, and so welcome Christina, welcome Andreas, and I'll leave it to Christina since we see you on the call initially and visually.
Hi everyone, it's very nice to meet you all. I want to thank you for inviting us to this event. I just wanted to say that I studied law school in Athens, law school. I haven't passed the bar in the US, but I did do my LLM in New York. And then I got back here in Greece and joined forces with my colleague Andreas to set up this practice. But we've known each other a long time. We've studied together law in Athens, and we have been working together ever since. I don't know, Andreas, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah.
And
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can hear me well, and I apologize that you cannot see me. I cannot also see the participants, but I understand it's 30 or more participants, which is a nice, good audience. I also started school, went to law school in Athens. I did my LLM in Brussels, so I'm indeed European focused. And Christina and I, for the several few years, have been essentially focusing on providing services to Greek expats primarily, and people of Greek descent, mainly in the US, but also in other countries around the world. Now, it's okay if I jump right into the presentation that we have prepared. Is that okay for everyone? I assume yes, from the silence. Good. So we were asked to give a presentation about Greek citizenship for people of Greek descent, also for people with no Greek descent, and also to give some pointers about the Golden Visa program, the so-called Golden Visa program, and other residency options. So I will caveat the presentation by saying I was happy to hear that Steve finds our advice detailed, comprehensive, and understandable. You will all see now how complicated this topic is. So what we will try to do here is to cover the key examples. There are so many different permutations, and each permutation comes with its own sub-scenarios. So we're not going to get into the most nuanced cases that we can think of. We're only going to stick to the basic ones. And the idea was that the participants here tonight leave with at least some high-level understanding of key facts about obtaining Greek citizenship, so that next time that they meet a client, they meet a colleague, they meet a friend, or for themselves, they pick up on someone's ability to apply for Greek citizenship. So, cutting to the chase, there are essentially 4 ways for someone to apply for Greek citizenship. The Greek legal framework provides for 4 different processes. I will use the term the following.
You're taking drugs? No, I really am sorry.
I'm sorry because I have a bit of trouble hearing. Can you not hear me well?
Andreas, we can hear you, but I'll ask everybody else to mute themselves. Thank you very much.
I just muted them.
Okay, that's okay. So I'm going to now introduce the 4 terminologies, 4 terms that I'm going to be using in Christina quite a lot going forward. So the 4 processes for Greek citizenship are citizenship by determination, citizenship by declaration, citizenship by naturalization, and then you can get citizenship through registration. Okay, now, the citizenship through declaration and determination, we will examine together and you'll understand soon why. So, when a potential applicant has one parent who is Greek, and the applicant was born before a specific date, depending on whether the parent is a mother or a father, the choice, 99% of the cases, the applicant will have to either apply for determination or for declaration, by determination or by declaration. It's key to understand that the choice is not made by the applicant. The choice is made by the facts. And what are the facts that we need to take into account? So when the applicant was born, whether the parent with Greek citizenship is a mother or a father, and what type of marriage this parent had. You see in slide number 7, what we call this is a mathematical formula of sorts, where you put the two elements together and you get to a result. In the table we prepared, and it will not make sense when looking at it, but I'm afraid that's what the law says. Okay, to give you an example, if your father was Greek and your parents did not have a Greek Orthodox marriage, then you, the applicant, has to apply by declaration. But if it was your mother who was a Greek citizen and your parents did not have a Greek Orthodox marriage, then you have to apply by determination. Now, why do we care about this? What's the difference? There are differences in terms of the process and in terms of the settlement. The procedural differences is that determination allows you to submit an application either at the Greek consulate or by bypassing the Greek consulate, appointing a proxy, for example, a lawyer, and submitting the application directly to the Greek authority. Whereas, if the applicant has to apply by declaration, the application can only be submitted via the Greek consulate. Now, that creates several complexities. I'm sure that if people here have had any interactions with the Greek consulate, they're not always very pleasant, and you need to wait a very long time to get an appointment. So our preference is usually to try to get the client by determination, get them to apply by determination. Sometimes what we can do is we can massage a little bit the facts so that we make an applicant eligible under this process. Another complexity to take into account is that when the Greek consulate is involved, and even though they're not supposed to, they will look at the application, they will look at the documents, they will try to check whether everything is in order. In reality, the Greek consulate is supposed to be acting as a mailman. So the applicant goes to the consulate, submits the application, the consulate does not review the application, the consulate is not the decision maker, but the consulate will just need to forward the application to the Greek authority that will examine the application. Instead, they start meddling into the process. And the 99% of the time, that creates problems. And the key root of the problem is that the Greek consulate, quite a few times, will have a divergent view from the Greek authorities about certain aspects of the application. And then we end up with having to convince the Greek consulate that they're making a mistake, which delays further the process. And then once the Greek consulate is satisfied, then we'll send the application to the Greek authorities. And as you can imagine, we have had cases where the Greek consulate would claim they're not competent to accept an application. The Greek authorities would tell us we are also not competent to accept the application, and then the applicant would be left in limbo, not being able to apply because none of the authorities would take on the jurisdiction. So that was a little bit about the process. Now, why does it matter about substance? When the applicant applies by determination, citizenship is provided with a retroactive effect from the time of the applicant's birth. When the applicant applies by declaration, it has a retroactive effect, citizenship, but by the date of application. So that has a knock-on effect on the applicant's children. If the applicant has children, then the children would be eligible to draw their citizenship rights only if their parents got a citizenship with a retroactive effect by their birth, so that the children of the applicant need to show that their parent was Greek at the time of their own birth. And I'm going to add one less complicating factor to this. And by now, I hope you can follow me. If the applicant applies by determination and the applicant has adult children, the adult children will then also need to submit their own standalone application through the same process, through the determination process. If the applicant applies by declaration and the applicant has minor children, then the children of the applicant will automatically get Greek citizenship. So the applicant will not get Greek citizenship with retroactive effect, but his minor children will get Greek citizenship without any additional process. And that means that there is the potential for an applicant by declaration to have adult children, and these children will still be able to apply for Greek citizenship, but not through determination and not through declaration, but through the process that we will discuss later, which is called naturalization. I'm not going to spend more time talking about the intricacies of the two processes. I think by now it's already clear that it's very complex. It is a very fact-specific, case-by-case analysis that we need to do. And sometimes what we try to do is to consider the entire family situation. So when someone approaches us, asking us about Greek citizenship, one of the first things that we need to determine is not only who is the applicant, but also whether the applicant has children and whether the children will eventually want to become Greek citizens. And taking that into account, we come up with the strategy of what's the best way for this applicant to submit an application. I am going to pause there. The next type of process is through the registration of acts. And I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague Christina to walk you through this. Hopefully, it will be a much less confusing topic than what I just discussed. Christina, go ahead.
Thank you, Andreas. So I'm going to talk about what seems to be the easiest to acquiring Greek citizenship. And that is where the applicant that meets certain criteria can register their birth directly at the Greek consulate or under conditions under the Special Registry of Athens via a proxy. The first case scenario would be if the applicant was born from two Greek parents. That is, of course, if they were registered as Greek citizens at the time of the birth. So then the applicant can just visit the competent Greek consulate or by themselves if they're over 18, or their parents can do it for them if they're underage. Which would be now the competent Greek consulate for this registration? That depends on where the act took place. And it must be under one of the states of jurisdiction of the consulate. For example, if I was born in Texas, I was born in Texas actually, then the competent Greek consulate would be the one in Houston. Now, during this appointment, the applicant must submit their original birth certificate with a certain certification, with an apostille stamp, and of course their parents' family lot, which has to be up to date. And the important thing is that the parents' marriage registration in Greece has to be completed before proceeding with the birth registration. Another case where the applicant could directly register their birth is if they were born after 1984 from one Greek parent. That is, again, one Greek parent who was registered at the time as a Greek citizen in the Greek municipal rolls. And last scenario would be if they were born from a Greek mother out of wedlock. Now, I wanted to share a few words and say, when is the Special Registry of Athens competent to proceed with such a registration? It's a registration of events which were not declared on time at the competent Greek consulate. Now the applicant lives in another country. For example, an applicant born in Japan now lives in New York and wants to declare their birth at the New York Greek consulate. They can't really do that anymore. They have to hire an attorney in Greece. The attorney must visit then the special registry through a power of attorney, of course, and declare the birth with all original documents in their hands. They also have to have with them a certificate of permanent residency issued by the Greek consulate proving that the applicant now lives in another country. This certificate is issued usually by submitting utility bills or bank statements or a lease agreement that proves a permanent residency of the applicant. And lastly, the special registry is competent for registration of events for the declaration of which it is necessary to travel a greater distance of 500 kilometers in order for the applicant to go to the competent consulate. In these cases, again, they hire an attorney in Greece who visits the special registry for them. The thing is that our experience with registering acts at the special registry is very disappointing. This authority is very formalistic, and they claim that they only transcribe acts, meaning that they have to register the names exactly as they appear on the certificates. They want the names to have zero inconsistencies, and this almost always causes problems because, you know, the names of most expats were Americanized, and that always makes it hard for the children to simply register their birth. For example, I have had applicants where the mother's name appears to be Dionysia in Greece, but she changed it to Sula in the US. And then the child could not prove that it is the same person. This type of registration would not go through the Special Registry of Athens. The good news is that if the applicant would try to register their birth through the Greek consulate, it might be easier because the Greek consulates are more flexible. They are more familiar with name changes and they're not that formalistic. So they might proceed with the registration even though this discrepancy existed. The downside of this is that the Greek consulates are very, very busy. For example, the New York consulate can give you an appointment like 2 years from now to register your birth. But I must say that it might worth a wait because if you have detected from before that such a discrepancy is in place, then we would advise the client not to even try to visit the special registry. So this is the process for the simple type of acquiring Greek citizenship. And then I would give back the floor to Andreas to you about naturalization.
Thank you. So essentially what we covered now are the instances where the applicant has one or two Greek parents. So if the applicant has one or two Greek parents, 99% of the cases, we will have to go via determination, declaration, or through the registration. But it may be the case that the applicant has more distant Greek ancestors. And that is the next thing we're going to talk about. In that case, there's still the option to apply for Greek citizenship. Okay, it could be your grandfather, it could be even a great-great-grandparent. You can go back as far back as you want. And in that case, the applicant needs to go through a process we call naturalization by descent. To make a small comment, there is the possibility to apply for naturalization by descent, even if your parent was Greek. And sometimes we opt for this option when the evidence of Greek citizenship of the parent is not strong enough. So, for example, it's very common that, especially for women, record keeping is not great in Greece for women born in the 1950s or earlier. Documents have been lost, have been destroyed, there have been fires. So if we are unable to obtain the proper birth certificate of the Greek parents, and instead we have alternative evidence like an old Greek ID, we would normally advise our clients to apply for naturalization, even though their parent is a Greek citizen. Now, a few words about the naturalization and what it entails. What to carry for the naturalization application? We have to compile all the documents that prove that the applicant is actually a descendant of the Greek ancestor, meaning that we have to compile all the marriage and birth certificates of the family members from the applicant all the way until the ancestor. In addition to that, the Greek consulate typically ask for the naturalization papers of the Greek ancestor and the federal background check of the applicant. In terms of the process, the applicant visits the Greek consulate once, submit the application, and to sit down and have an interview with the Greek consul. The interview is mainly in the form of an informal discussion. It is not a test. There will be discussion about the upbringing of the applicant, potentially participating in cultural events of the Greek community, some questions about history, culture, politics, but everything is very high level and very manageable. The idea is that the Greek consul wants to ensure that the applicant has a meaningful connection to Greece. And, it's not just someone who wants to take advantage of the lenient legal regime of the Greek citizenship framework. So I would say the threshold is very low, to be fair. With the right preparation for this interview, it's a relatively streamlined process, I may call it. Once the application is submitted and the interview is given, the Greek consul will draft a report, and the report will have a recommendation, a positive or a negative. Then the application and the report will be sent to the Ministry of the Interior in Greece. A case handler will examine the application, and in 99% of the cases, the case handler will just follow the Greek consul's recommendation. There may be some follow-up questions raised by the case handler, but usually these are procedural nature. Once the application is approved, then the applicant will have to go to the Greek consulate one more time to give an oath. And a month or two later, the Greek citizenship is obtained officially. We also prepared a slide about naturalization for foreign nationals with no Greek ancestors. The process is a lot different, mainly because there are several conditions that the applicant needs to meet. The applicant needs to live in Greece for a certain amount of years, and the applicant needs to also prove that they have been contributing to the Greek society and the Greek economy. So there's a long list of documentation that we need to include in that type of naturalization application. And of course, the applicant needs to take a citizenship test. Again, just to make sure I highlight the difference. For an applicant with Greek ancestors, no need to live in Greece, no need to speak Greek even, and it's just an informal interview. Whereas for an applicant, foreign national with no Greek ancestors, the applicant needs to live in Greece for a certain amount of years, and they need to take a proper citizenship test. This concludes the section we prepared about Greek citizenship. I don't know whether we should pause now for questions, but I'm looking at the time, so perhaps I can move on to the residency discussion and then leave a few minutes at the end for questions, if that's okay with everyone.
Yes, please do, Andreas. I see the golden visa and residency permit slide next. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So the golden visa scheme, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, is essentially a residency permit by investment. So if a foreign national invests in real estate property in Greece, then Greek authorities award this person with a residency permit. The residency permit also extends to family members. So not only the investor, but certain family members will also be eligible to obtain a residency permit. There are certain requirements that the investment needs to meet. Right now, the base amount of the investment is 400,000 euros. In some areas of Greece, the investment threshold goes up to 800,000, and there is a lower threshold for certain type of properties. So usually when, if the investor acquires industrial property and turns it into residential, for example, that is subject to a lower threshold of 250,000 euros. The investment needs to take place in one property. It used to be the case that you could split the investment into several properties, but not anymore. The property needs to be 120 square meters at least. And most importantly, under the latest changes, a property cannot be used for short-term lease. It was very common that the investors would buy property, they would put them on Airbnb so that they would generate some income throughout the year, and they would just reserve the dates that they wanted to live in Greece for themselves. That's not possible anymore. The investor can do a long-term lease, so 1 year lease or more, but not a short-term lease. So there are several conditions attached when making this type of investment. That's why when we have a client who comes to our office, one of the very first things that we want to make sure to communicate to the client is that, yes, a golden visa is an option, but there are also other options. So it is a priority, I think, and most clients agree, the priority to find the investment that will really serve their needs, even if it does not end up being golden visa eligible. So in addition to that, obviously you need to go through property transfer process. That takes a lot of time in Greece and it's very expensive. Give you an idea, a normal closing time for real estate transaction in Greece would be 6 to 8 months. And that's a good scenario. We find that most of the time the sellers put properties on sale without actually being ready to be sold. So it's very common in Greece for the sellers to find an interested buyer. And once the buyer has signed the deposit agreement, then they start working on the documentation of the property. In 90% of the cases, the property is not completely up to date, or there may be some illegalities. And in that case, it will further delay the process. So we have been working on transactions that require 12 months until closing because of that. And in addition, as I said, it's a very costly process. Approximately 10% of the purchase price is required to cover the expenses of the process. That will include the legal fees, real estate agents, taxes, notaries, accountants, civil engineers, and so on. So to come back to what I was saying, Golden Visa is one of the residency permits that are available, but someone can combine a different type of residency permit with buying a property that they like and without being subject to the conditions of the Golden Visa. I would say that generally the Greek legal framework is quite flexible when it comes to offering residency permits. We have listed some examples in slide number 19 about other bases to apply for residency permits. One of the most common ones that we usually advise clients on is to acquire a residency permit on the basis that someone has a passive income of 2,000 euros per month, or someone with a professional, income of 3,500 is also eligible to apply for a residency permit. Of course, if someone is married to a Greek citizen, is automatically eligible to apply for a residency permit. There is a procedural difference between Golden Visa and other residency permits, though. The Golden Visa residency permit is, I would say, the easiest to obtain in terms of the process because it does not require essentially the involvement of the applicant. The applicant will give power of attorney to a lawyer, and the lawyer will take care of the rest. Whereas when you apply to a different legal basis for a residency permit, the first step requires the applicant to visit the Greek consulate and submit the application for the residency permit. Once the Greek consulate grants the entry visa, then the applicant will travel to Greece and apply for the final residency permit. However, the second step can also be taken care of by a lawyer. I think that essentially concludes the discussion about the residency permit. What I would like to reiterate is that Golden Visa has been advertised quite a lot, and most of our clients who approach our office ask straight for a Golden Visa. But in reality, especially under the latest changes of the legal framework, I would say it's quite onerous to opt for a Golden Visa, especially when you have the option to achieve the same end result, but going through a less onerous process. So keep that in mind for whoever you might hear anyone who might want to invest in Greece or apply for a residency permit. The key message is that it's very easy to get a residency permit in Greece, and ideally, not going through the Golden Visa scheme is actually affords a lot more flexibility on the applicants and the investor. That concludes our presentation, and I see we have a few minutes. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Apologies for the very confusing topics that we discussed, but we're happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
Andreas, we have a question. And Andrew, could you go ahead and ask your question?
Right, thank you. A couple of things, and by the way, I speak as somebody who invested over $1 million in a piece of property and did it in such a way that it disqualified me from the golden visa, which was painful.
Okay.
Because we bought it through a company that my wife and I co-own, and if you buy through a company, it's only a sole owner of the company that gets a golden visa. So that was a mistake. So we can't, as I understand it, there's a big difference between the golden visa and the other types of residence permits, because the golden visa does not have a residency requirement, whereas other, like the economica annexato atomo, financially independent person visa, does have a residency requirement of 183 days. And I think you have to be a taxpayer. And if you don't become actually resident, you can't renew the visa. But golden visa is different. Am I correct about that distinction?
It is correct. Technically, yes. In practice, the authorities, especially the tax authorities, will not check whether you should have declared yourself as a tax resident. And we haven't seen the authorities checking either when we apply for a renewal. So
Okay.
To give you an example, the second legal base that we listed, so the one that requires professional monthly income of 3,500 euros, this is what we call the digital nomad visa.
Right.
The Greek authorities do not expect the so-called digital nomad to actually obtain residency in Greece by spending 180 days in the country. And yet
Right.
you can still renew for now as many times as you want.
Okay. Then I have another question, because I think I would still prefer the golden visa route. And apparently one way to do it is by buying 400,000 euros of Greek government bonds. But when I've asked some lawyers about that route, they suddenly become silent, as though it never really goes that way. And as I understand it, it's actually awkward and difficult for a foreigner to buy Greek government bonds. And this becomes more of a business or financial question than a legal question. But as I understand it, in the United States, if you want to buy 100,000 of U.S. Treasury bonds, you put in an order, you are guaranteed to get all 100. Now, if I am Merrill Lynch or J.P. Morgan, I might put in a bid for 2 billion, and they might give me only 1.2 billion as a pro rata. And I'm told that in Greece, I put in a bid for 100,000. They may say, "Oh, sorry for you, there was oversubscribed. You get 50,000." So if you're trying to aim at 400,000, it's actually hard to get the right number if you buy at auction, as opposed to buying on the secondary market. And then I'm afraid if I buy on the secondary market, are the spreads between the bid and ask prices so great that inevitably one would get a bad deal?
Yep, indeed. Look, I say that the Greek bonds market is indeed complex. In reality, I think the reason why most people do not opt for this is because it's a bad financial decision. Although that might change. So up until now, the investors have the opportunity to take advantage of the real estate property by short-term leasing it. That's why people would prefer, instead of putting the 400,000 in Greek bonds, to invest in property that would generate some income. Now, for now, I have not seen this changing. The interest of most investors still remains with real estate property, perhaps as a safer investment. But I agree, the Greek bond market is definitely complex. You cannot be guaranteed to be able to secure the amount that you need. So it makes the whole process a lot more uncertain. And investors usually do not like uncertainty. I don't know if, I'm not sure I can provide more insight right now about the Greek bonds.
No, I appreciate it. It's complex. The problem is that's about the only route I'm willing to go. So I'm trying to figure out more about it.
And that's another.
Indeed. So, yes, please go ahead.
I just go ahead and finish your answer. We have one more question about the golden visa.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We can go for the next question.
All right. The question is the golden visa the only residency permit that allows children? The children under 21 years old, okay, they are eligible to obtain a residency permit if their parent obtains any type of residency permit. That's the rule of thumb. The additional, let's say, advantage of the golden visa is that the parents of the investor and the spouse and the in-laws are all eligible to obtain a residency permit, which is not the case with the other types of residency permits. All right, thank you. Juliet, does that answer your question?
Can I ask
think you're muted. Yeah.
This is Jim Fatinas. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
This has been very helpful. Thank you both. I'm probably not unlike many in this audience. I was born from two Greek parents in the United States. My parents were both born in the United States, but their parents, all four of them, were born in Greece. And I've for a couple of years now, been trying to wade through the thicket of the requirements for citizenship. And one question I have is my grandfather, my father's father, was born in 1868, not 1968, 1868, in a small village in Mani, then called Kotiferi, now Thalame. And my question is, in 1868, what would be the documentation that I would try to seek to establish his Greek citizenship? He was born in 1868 and he emigrated to the United States at the turn of the century, like a lot of the Greeks in San Francisco. So what would I seek and how would I get it in terms of authenticating my grandfather's Greek citizenship?
Okay, indeed, that's a bit challenging. Although even in 1860s, the military list will most probably exist. So it's very unlikely that you're actually going to find a birth certificate, but you can find potentially an entry in what we call the mail register, which is essentially the list that the municipalities use to compile for the purposes of the military. It is not impossible to find this information. However, if I understood correctly, you mentioned that you have, well, 4 Greek ancestors, all 4 grandparents.
Yes.
Were born in Greece, which means that you essentially need evidence only for one. You don't need to find evidence for all 4. So it could be birth records of your grandmothers, I think unlikely, but perhaps the mail registry of your other grandfather might be more likely. And in case all of that is not successful, the next best thing is to find old Greek documents, like an old Greek ID or an old Greek passport. Whatever you can find, that would be useful to establish your claim for Greek citizenship.
Can I follow up on that, Jim? So, Andreas, how does your firm, let's say Jim were to come to your firm and ask for assistance, how would you assist him in that process?
So we assist in the collection of the documents and the investigation of the Greek records. So we would be able to actually coordinate with the competent municipality and have them look at the right records.
Okay. I may contact you, but did you say I should get documentation of citizenship from all four grandparents? I mean, obviously that'd be ideal, but my understanding is one would be sufficient, particularly on the male side.
No, exactly. That's what I said. That you have four, but you only need evidence from
okay, yeah,
one.
right, yeah. And well, in fact, my grandmother, my grandfather's spouse, was born in the same village. So
So I
in
want
Greek
to,
style, he immigrated at the turn of the century, and of course, she was pregnant with the firstborn, my oldest uncle, and then 5 years later, she came over to San Francisco, and they had four more boys. So
I've got
Look, there is. There is potentially, and this is what we would do as a last resort that has a lot of risk. But you can always find records on Ellis Island about arrivals or the naturalization documents. And in both, it will be stated that this person was a Greek citizen. Even that might be eligible evidence to prove that your ancestor was Greek. It is not ideal, and I would advise anyone to proceed with this type of evidence only if they really, really, really want to obtain Greek citizenship, taking into account that there is a risk that his application might be rejected.
So I have follow-up to Jim's remarks. Chris Konios is a member of our society, is in Greece right now, and he went to Rhesus, which is the village of his grandparents, and they went to the priest, and the priest did not, and his grandfather was a little later than yours, Jim, but they didn't have birth certificates, but they had this military registry, and he got a copy of it and certified it somehow, but it shows all males born in a particular year that the Greek military kept these records. If you're trying to do it for your yaya, you may going to have a problem because there weren't birth certificates and there's no military records kept. I have a different question. What if your grandparents came from Micra, Asia, Bulgaria, or somewhere else, and they were under the Ottomans, and they were Greek, the whole area was Greek, and I'm in that category, and I have a ton of relatives in Greece that left and migrated to Greece. So what do you do with a case like that? Is it ethnic Greeks, or is it born in what was Greece at the time? Because Thessaloniki wasn't even Greece at the time my papu came over.
It is a, I would say, gray area, I would call it. And it depends on the type of evidence that we can produce. Then we would decide what's the right process to go for. Technically, in the case that you described to me, the applicant will have to apply as an ethnic Greek through a different type of naturalization that we did not cover in our presentation. And that naturalization applies to applicants born in regions that we just described, or in the Soviet Russia. The peculiarity with this process is that even though the applicant does not need to take a citizenship test, they will be expected to speak Greek. So there will be an interview with the Greek consul, but they need to demonstrate that they have at least some fluency in Greek. So this is a process that sits somewhere in between the naturalization by descent that we discussed, and the naturalization for foreign nationals.
But so there isn't.
And in terms of evidence, yes, sorry, go ahead.
So there isn't a process. I mean, there were 1 million Greeks from Nicosia that came to Greece, and so they're not. They don't count them at all, or is there a process there?
Well, it's still they're still counted. They just have to go through a different process in most cases. So there's also the possibility, of course, for someone who came from Turkey to Greece, that they, for example, got married afterwards. And in that case, for example, we're able to produce a marriage certificate from Greek authorities. That would change the story. But if we're talking about an ancestor with no records at all by any Greek authority, and the only thing that we can produce is records from foreign authorities where it is stated that this person was ethnically Greek, then we're talking about, in most cases, about this middle naturalization process that I described.
Thank you.
One final question, Andreas, because we're getting to the end of our time together, and that is, if one obtains citizenship for themselves and their children, would the son be liable for Greek military service requirements?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. The question is, if one obtains citizenship for themselves and their children, would their son be liable for Greek military service?
Yes. So all male citizens of Greece are obliged to do the military service, but if they reside abroad, they can apply for an exemption. So in the example that you mentioned, if the child is below 18 years old, initially no action point. When this child becomes 18 years old, the child will have to apply for an exemption via the Greek consulate. It's a very easy process, though. Like documents are not difficult to collect, and the consulate very quickly issues the exemption papers. And with the exemption papers, as an adult, this child can apply for a Greek passport. So the adult child needs this exemption to be able to get a Greek passport.
Okay. Peter, I think that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Christina and Andreas, for your wonderful talk. You're very informative. I think our members really appreciate it. This talk was recorded, so there'll be more members watching it in the future. And if you have a topic that you want us to get speakers for, this topic was requested by several of you. Let us know. We do have our talk on the Supreme Court case. The date is going to be changed. But if you have other topics you want, I know people want ethics classes. We're going to try to find somebody that could do those. But thank you all for coming. It was very good to see this many people. And Kali Nikta.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Kali Mata.